You are a human baby. You cannot walk, you cannot talk, you cannot feed yourself. You cannot regulate your own body temperature. You have no idea what a predator is, but predators absolutely know what you are. You weigh about 3 kilograms. You are, to put it bluntly, a biological disaster waiting to happen. And yet, somehow, you have ancestors, thousands of generations of them. Which means that somewhere, at some point, a chain of ancient humans figured out how to keep something as catastrophically fragile as a newborn alive. Not for a day, not for a week. For long enough to make more babies, over and over again for 300,000 years. So the question isn't just interesting, it's personal, because if even one of your direct ancestors had failed at this, just once, you wouldn't be here watching this video right now. You'd simply not exist. That's a little unsettling when you think about it, but here's the wild part. The answer to how ancient humans kept children alive isn't just a list of old-fashioned survival tips. It's actually a window into some of the most sophisticated social behavior ever to evolve on this planet. Behavior that most people never think about. Behavior that, in many ways, we've quietly abandoned in the modern world and are now paying the price for. Let's start with the obvious question nobody asks. Why is human birth so difficult in the first place? Most animals come out running, or at least walking. A baby giraffe drops nearly 2 meters to the ground, lands, gets up, and starts trotting within an hour. A baby horse is on its feet in less than 2. Even our closest relatives, chimpanzees, are able to cling to their mother almost immediately after birth. Human babies? Absolutely not. A human newborn is helpless for months, completely and utterly dependent on other people for literally everything. And this isn't a coincidence or a design flaw. It's actually a very specific evolutionary trade-off with a name. Scientists call it secondary altriciality, which sounds like a made-up word, but it means something real. Human babies are born earlier relative to their development than almost any other primate. Why? Because of your brain. Here's the problem. Human brains are enormous, not just compared to other animals, even compared to what our bodies should theoretically support. A fully developed human brain at birth would require a skull so large that it simply could not pass through the birth canal. So evolution did something rather clever and slightly horrifying. It made us give birth early. Human babies are essentially born premature by design. At birth, your brain is only about 25% of its adult size. A chimpanzee baby is born at around 45%. This means that a huge amount of human brain development, the stuff that takes other animals weeks or a few months, takes us years. And all of that development has to happen outside the womb. Completely exposed to the world while the baby is entirely dependent on other people. This is sometimes called the obstetric dilemma, and it means something crucial. A human infant cannot survive alone, not even theoretically, not even for a few hours. The species quite literally cannot reproduce successfully without social support. And this changes everything, because it means that how did ancient humans keep children alive isn't really a question about individual skill. It's a question about collective behavior. About social systems, about the structure of groups, and what ancient humans came up with was, honestly, remarkable. You've heard the phrase "it takes a village to raise a child." It's become a bit of a cliché at this point. People say it at baby showers, they put it on motivational posters. But here's what most people don't realize. In the context of early human evolution, it was not a metaphor. It was a literal biological strategy. And it was so effective that anthropologists believe it may be one of the main reasons Homo sapiens outcompete every other hominin species on the planet. The theory is called cooperative breeding, and it goes something like this. In most primate species, child rearing is almost entirely the responsibility of the mother. The father occasionally helps, but the core burden falls on one individual. This limits how many offspring a mother can realistically have because she can only care for a limited number of dependent children at once. Humans broke this pattern dramatically. In hunter-gatherer societies, which represent the vast majority of human evolutionary history, childcare was distributed across the entire social group. Not as a favor, not as a cultural nicety, but as a fundamental part of how the group functioned. Grandmothers played an especially critical role. So much so that there's actually a dedicated scientific hypothesis about it called, you guessed it, the grandmother hypothesis. This theory, developed in the 1990s by anthropologist Kristen Hawkes, proposes that human menopause, which is itself extremely unusual in the animal kingdom, evolved specifically to allow older women to stop reproducing and instead invest energy into the survival of their grandchildren. Let that sink in for a second. The idea is that human females live for decades past their reproductive years precisely because experienced grandmothers are so valuable to child survival. That evolution found it more efficient to have them stop having babies and start helping raise everyone else's. And the data actually supports this. Studies of traditional societies have found that the presence of a maternal grandmother significantly increases child survival rates. In some populations, it's one of the strongest predictors of whether a child lives past age 2. It wasn't just grandmothers either. Aunts, uncles, older siblings, unrelated adults within the group, all of these individuals participated in childcare in ways that simply don't happen in most primate societies. Young children were passed around, held, carried, fed, watched over by multiple adults throughout the day. Researchers who have studied modern hunter-gatherer groups, which give us at least some window into ancestral human behavior, report that in groups like the AKA of Central Africa, fathers are within arm's reach of their infants roughly 47% of the time. 47%. That's more involved than most fathers in industrialized societies today. The point being, the social architecture around ancient human children was extraordinarily dense. The child was embedded in a web of relationships, not just dependent on two parents. This wasn't philosophy. It was survival engineering. Now, let's talk about something that tends to make modern audiences a bit uncomfortable. In ancient human societies, breastfeeding looked nothing like what we consider normal today. First, duration. In traditional societies, and among our closest primate relatives, breastfeeding typically continued for 2 to 4 years, sometimes longer. The World Health Organization currently recommends breastfeeding up to age 2 or beyond, which strikes many people as surprising, but from an evolutionary standpoint, weaning before 2 years would have been genuinely unusual and potentially dangerous. Second, frequency. Hunter-gatherer mothers typically breastfed their children multiple times per hour during the day. Some studies estimate as many as 4 times per hour in the early months. This constant feeding serves multiple purposes. It provides nutrition, it regulates the infant's stress response, and crucially, it acts as a natural contraceptive, suppressing ovulation and spacing births apart by roughly 3 to 4 years. That birth spacing matters enormously. One of the most consistent findings in studies of hunter-gatherer populations is that children are naturally spaced about 3 to 4 years apart. This is not an accident. It's the biological rhythm of a species where carrying and nursing one child to relative independence before having another was a matter of survival. But here's where it gets interesting. Wet nursing, that is, breastfeeding someone else's child, appears to be extremely ancient and cross-cultural. Anthropological evidence suggests that in many societies, multiple women in a group would breastfeed children who weren't their own. This not only helped orphaned or ill children survive, but also strengthened social bonds between families in ways that may have had broader survival benefits. It was, in a very literal sense, a community resource. Let's think practically for a moment. You are a hunter-gatherer mother in the Pleistocene. You need to gather food, probably walking several kilometers a day over uneven terrain. You need to do this while keeping a completely helpless infant alive. How? You cannot put the baby down. Predators exist, other dangers exist. The baby cannot regulate its own temperature. If it gets cold, it can die surprisingly quickly. And a crying baby, left alone, is a beacon to anything nearby that eats meat. The solution ancient humans arrived at was elegant and is now backed by extensive research. Constant physical contact. Carrying infants against the body, what we now call baby wearing, appears to be the ancestral norm for our species. The evidence comes from multiple directions. Physiologically, human infants have a strong grasping reflex. When you touch the palm of a newborn, they grip instinctively with surprising force. This reflex, which is actually a remnant behavior, likely evolved for clinging to a caregiver. Neurologically, infant brain development is strongly optimized for close physical contact. Studies have shown that skin-to-skin contact regulates infants' heart rate, breathing, body temperature, and stress hormones. Infants who are carried more, cry less. Not because they're spoiled, but because the contact is meeting a genuine biological need. Cross-cultural surveys have found that in societies where infants are carried throughout the day, infant crying is dramatically lower than in societies where babies spend significant time alone. Roughly 50% less by some estimates. The crying isn't a personality trait. It's a response to conditions that, from an evolutionary standpoint, signal danger. Ancient human infants were almost certainly carried for the majority of their waking hours. They slept in physical contact with caregivers. They were rarely, if ever, left alone. Modern parenting advice, by contrast, has spent much of the last century encouraging the opposite. Cribs, separate rooms, schedules, sleep training. Some of this works fine, but it's worth knowing that we are, in historical terms, running a rather large and poorly controlled experiment on our own species. Eventually, at some point, the baby has to eat something other than milk. And this is where things get creative and occasionally disgusting. The introduction of solid foods in ancient societies was not what we'd recognize today. There were no pureed organic carrot pouches. There were no perfectly calibrated first foods. There was whatever the group had managed to find or kill that day, processed in whatever way was available. The most common method for softening food for infants across ancient and traditional societies was pre-mastication, adults chewing food and then transferring it to the infant's mouth. This sounds shocking by modern hygiene standards, and it is true that it transfers bacteria from adult to infant mouths. But here's the twist. Some of those bacteria may actually be beneficial. Research has found that infants who receive pre-masticated food may be exposed to beneficial oral microbiota from their caregivers, potentially supporting immune development. It's also worth noting that among our primate relatives, chimpanzees regularly use pre-mastication. It appears to be an extremely ancient behavior, probably as old as our genus. Beyond pre-mastication, ancient children would have been given soft foods relatively early. Marrow from cracked bones, which is calorie-dense and easy to consume, mashed plant foods, eggs, small pieces of fish or meat. The diet was remarkably varied. And research on ancient dental remains suggests that children in hunter-gatherer societies generally had better overall nutrition and fewer cavities than early agricultural populations who became heavily dependent on starchy grains. Yes, hunter-gatherer children had better teeth than Bronze Age children. Turns out that eating everything is healthier than eating mostly bread. Here is something nobody tells you about the ancestral human sleep environment. Nobody slept alone. We touched on this in another context, but it deserves its own section because it's so dramatically different from modern expectations. In every observed hunter-gatherer society and in the vast majority of traditional cultures worldwide, infants and young children sleep in physical contact with at least one adult. Not in a separate room, not in a crib, against a human body all night. This practice, called co-sleeping or bed sharing, is not a counterculture parenting choice. It is the default human behavior for roughly 99% of our species' existence. The arguments against it in modern Western medicine are rooted in very specific and real concerns. Particularly the risk of accidental suffocation in soft bedding environments with impaired caregivers. These are legitimate concerns in specific modern contexts. But in ancestral environments, sleeping on firm surfaces with sober and responsive caregivers, in relatively cool conditions, the same risks don't apply in the same way. And the benefits of co-sleeping for infant development are well documented. More stable body temperature, more regulated breathing, more frequent nighttime nursing, and significantly higher rates of breastfeeding duration. There's also an interesting theory about co-sleeping in SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. Some researchers, including anthropologist James McKenna, who has spent decades studying infant sleep, have proposed that the normal stimulation provided by a sleeping adult's breathing and movement helps regulate an infant's own breathing patterns during a developmental window when that regulation is still unreliable. Whether or not that specific theory is fully proven, the broader point stands. Human infant physiology evolved expecting physical contact during sleep. The separate nursery is a very, very recent invention. And the infant mortality statistics for most of human history are sobering enough to suggest that for most of those years, something was working. Let's be honest about something. For most of human history, infant mortality was staggeringly high by modern standards. Best estimates suggest that in Paleolithic and early Neolithic populations, somewhere between 30% and 50% of children died before age 5. This is not because ancient humans didn't care, it's because they were operating without germ theory, without antibiotics, without vaccines, without modern nutrition science. Without most of the things that have driven child mortality down by roughly 96% since 1800. They did what they could, and some of what they did was actually effective. Medicinal plant use appears to be ancient. Chimpanzees self-medicate with specific plants, and the archaeological record shows evidence of deliberate herb use going back at least 50,000 years. Many traditional societies developed sophisticated pharmacopoeias, collections of plant-based remedies that we are still mining today for pharmaceutical leads. Willow bark, the original aspirin, has been used for pain and fever management for thousands of years. Honey was used as an antimicrobial wound treatment in ancient Egypt, and likely much earlier. Garlic has genuine antimicrobial properties that ancient peoples had empirically identified long before they had any framework to explain why. None of this saved children from bacterial meningitis or severe dehydration, but it wasn't nothing. What also existed extensively and universally was ritual.